خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين الخيرين الفاضلين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتولى بمقدمه الفدا ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The last 2 nights, we talked about the idea of fasting itself. Right? We tried to link the idea of fasting and taqwa. Because at the end of that ayat in Surah Baqarah 183, Allah says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. After all of this fasting, maybe you might become more muttaqi. You might gain more God consciousness. So we discussed the relationship between fasting and taqwa. And the general conclusion was that fasting, if we're aware, can make us rewire some of our habits. It can make us rethink some of our normal thinking patterns and the way that we act. If we employ fasting like this, then it can become transformative. Otherwise, then yes, fasting just becomes a basic ritual that doesn't have as much value as it should, and we may not be able to gain taqwa from that. We want to go forward into our discussion now and start our main topic. And our series of From Muslim to Mu'min is what we started with in 2016. So I want to summarize this discussion that we had 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because this serves as a preliminary for the discussion that we're going to start and the series that we'll be starting for the next 2 weeks. So our discussion 3 years ago, when we talked about this idea of From Muslim to Mu'min, was centralized and surrounded the discussion of identity, of Muslim identity. We talked about specifically why is it that we as Muslims who are coming to these centers constantly, maybe every Thursday night for Jum'ah, we're at least coming for a Shahada or a Wilada, month of Muharram, month of Ramadan. We're getting constant reminders about akhlaq and spirituality in our Saturday schools or Sunday schools, or when we were raised, we learned the ahkam. But why is it that after all of these years, we still have trouble practicing? Why is it after all of this time, learning about Islam, all of these reminders, we still fail to act upon the belief system which we think that we have? So we tried to examine this idea. And we said that Allah gives us a clue in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hashr, chapter 59, verse 19, where He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Don't be like those who forgot about Allah. Allah made them forget their own nafs. Allah made them forget their own identity, who they truly are. And then the conclusion is what? أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. These people are the ones who become fasiq and open sinners. So we took that and we flipped the verse around. So look, we have people who are open sinners or who disobey Allah. Why did that happen? It's because they forgot themselves. How did they forget themselves? How did they forget their identity? It's because they forgot about Allah. So we traced the cause and effect like this. And we found the source of all the issues was forgetting about God. Now again, we said, how was that possible? So we gave a few different factors. We said, number one, the reason that people, although claiming to be Muslim, followers of Ahlul Bayt, still find themselves forgetting about Allah in their daily lives. Number one was their early childhood. As far as parenting is concerned, their upbringing and their early developmental training. We said that even if somebody, their parents are, let's say, practicing Muslims, they're mu'mineen, they're mukhlisin, but maybe their parenting style is not Islamic completely. Because you have many individuals who have the right intention. They want to raise their children to be, mu'mineen. They want them to be believers, but the methods and tactics that they employ in the house are not actually the ones that have been mentioned by the Ahlul Bayt. For example, again, I don't want to go into this, and I'm sure you just had a session about this, a few days ago, so this is just a reminder for us, that in that famous 0 to 7 phase, that first phase of childhood, the children are the masters. They're allowed to freely play and go around. They should be free to do everything that they want to, as long as they're not hurting themselves or somebody else, right? But sometimes what happens, we as parents, we intrude a bit too much on their free playing. We get involved in their freedom and start limiting them little by little. And this cuts off some of their connection to Allah. Right? And again, because this is not time to go into that session, we'll leave that for another day. That's one factor, is their parenting, their raising, what happened to them when they were younger. The second factor is, as they grow up now, the second phase is their friends. Even if, let's say, they had a perfect upbringing when they were younger, now, later on, especially when they're in that second phase, from 7 to 14, if the people that they surround themselves with are not religious people, they'll lose that identity quick. Even for us as adults, and even young adults, when kids go off to college, again, even when their upbringing is strong, they go to college, they hear all of these doubts about Islam, all these things that they become exposed to, or even for people who are in the workplace. You know, one intelligent atheist can come and ruin somebody's life if we don't have a strong upbringing, if we don't have a strong group of friends who are helping encourage and rejuvenate our faith, right? That was the second factor, is who we surround ourselves with. The third was our society and community too. Maybe your upbringing was good. Maybe your friend circle is good as well. But perhaps the society and the community, meaning the masjid, the center, whatever, maybe the people there are not encouraging a strong Islamic identity. Maybe the only reason they might come to a center is just because, they feel like they have to. Maybe they don't express their Islamic identity at the center. And this happens in many different centers, right? Is the only thing that brings people to the center is just some sort of cultural reasons. Now, alhamdulillah, we're not judging people in a negative sense. We're just saying, look, these are reasons why people lose their identity. Although on one hand, they say, I believe in God, la ilaha illallah. I believe in Rasulullah, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj. So we believe in the shahadatain, the kalamatain, believe in the usul ad-din. But then when it comes to acting upon it because of our weak identity, because of friends, family, all these things, because the community there is not supporting us in the struggles that we have, we lose that identity. We forget about God day by day. The fourth factor was schooling. Right? Islamic schooling is a very, very hot topic right now. I think we talked about it a few years ago. We talked about, people right now are in doubt. Should we send our kids to public school where they might be able to get a proper secular education, but we know that they won't get a proper religious education, so we make up for that by sending them to a Saturday or Sunday school? Or do we strive to set up a full-time Islamic school? Do we strive to set up homeschools where they get secular and Islamic? What do we do? So this is a big question, right? But regardless, in any of those scenarios, if those schooling systems that are set up, whether it's the homeschool, whether it's an Islamic full-time school, or whether it's public school, whatever's being taught there and the method of being taught, meaning the pedagogy that's being used there, will have an effect on the children. Meaning it's very possible for Muslim teachers in a homeschool or an Islamic school to un-Islamically teach the children. It's very possible. And on the other side, it's possible for somebody to go to a public school and the atheistic teacher that they have might be a better role model than anybody else in the community, right? These things are very possible. So it's tough to kind of give, it's very tough to give, like you have to do this or you have to do that. Everything kind of needs to be judged in its place. So this was the fourth factor. And the final one, of course, is the media, especially social media. And again, we don't need to get into that. I think it's very obvious. The way that the media encourages us to act upon our own nafs, right? The Islamic spiritual mission is specifically to destroy our nafs, right? To get rid of that ananiya, right? That selfishness, the egoism, the egotism. But on the other side, especially with social media, it's the exact opposite. Express yourself as much as possible. You have a right. Say whatever you want. Show everybody what you're doing. So it's completely antithetical to the Islamic spiritual mission. Now again, this itself has its own discussion. Are there positives with social media? Yes. Does everybody use these positives? Maybe not. So that's a separate discussion as well. But again, we're just concluding and summarizing what we discussed a few years ago. Then we said, okay, with all these factors there, losing our identity, well, how do we get it back now? What do we do? How do we regain our tawheedi, monotheistic, Islamic Muslim identity? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Wa'ajjil farajahum. We said one of the ways that is taught by our scholars and mentioned in some narrations is that a person, the reason they might lack in their belief, the reason their iman might be weakened and deficient is because they don't have certainty and certitude in their beliefs in the first place. One narration which is attributed to the first Imam says, أَفْضَلُ الْإِيمَانِ حُسْنُ الْإِيقَانِ. That the most afdal, the best kind of iman comes from what? حُسْنُ الْإِيقَانِ. Coming from excellent and strong, iqan, ya'ni, yaqeen, certainty. Now a lot of us from, let's say, who have been raised in the East, we pretty much took this stuff in the way that the Urafah describe is that we have a very taqleedi way of understanding things, right? Ta'abbudi. We pretty much understand things by authority. Our parents said something, the teacher said something, the alim said something, the sheikh said something, and I accept it. No questions. And maybe in the East that worked. But as many of us came over here and people actually started questioning us on these things, that same stuff didn't hold up anymore. And of course, this is even exponentially true for the youth, who from the beginning were usually trained in an Eastern mentality or with an Eastern system of taqleed and ta'abbud, appealing to authority. But they're being questioned and they're even being taught the opposite, that you need to use your brain, you need to use your intellect, use rational proofs. So what we said is that the first step that we can maybe do is go back through all of our usul ad-din, all of our fundamental beliefs and try to prove them one by one rationally. No Quran, no hadith, nothing like that. No kind of weakened examples. Only things that would hold up with pure logic and reason. So we went one by one. First, we proved the existence of God, right? Because in another narration attributed to the first Imam, it says, he said, "At-tawheed hayatun nafs." Tawheed, that true monotheistic understanding, unicity or unity of Allah, is hayatun nafs. It's like that lifeblood and life force for our soul, for our identity. So we needed that first and foremost. We talked about this argument from design, right? This teleological argument. We also talked about the proof of imkan and wujub, where we have this idea of contingent existences and necessary existences, right? Cause and effect, or needing a first cause, for example. And we gave the example of a relay race, right? That we see things existing right now, and this existence that they have, nobody has it by themselves, right? We didn't have the power to bring ourselves into existence. This naturally leads us to conclude that there must have been some sort of existence which possessed existence itself and gave it to everything else, right? After we proved without a doubt God's existence, then we started going through some of the qualities. The first was about divine justice. We talked about good and evil specifically, right? If we want to follow God's laws, some of us need to know whether these laws, this sharia, is actually just or not. Because for many of us, even though we might believe in God's existence, even that doubt in our mind of whether or not these rules, these ahkam, all these things in the sharia that we find in our Marja's book, we might not trust the rulings. This seems unfair, I don't trust it, it seems irrational. So we wanted to then prove that everything which comes from and emanates from God has to be just, has to be khair, it has to be good, and nothing else. We talked about where oppression and injustice actually stem from. That any evil that we see in the world is from our own doing. And it could actually be a reward, or in a sense, a hastening of a punishment that we should get in the next world. But instead, Allah sees that with our iman, He gives us that punishment earlier. Because when you get a punishment in this world, the punishment is reduced, the penalty is reduced. But when you get it later on, whether it's in barzakh, or in death, or in qiyamah, it's going to be much more intense. So for mu'mineen, believers, then Allah expedites their punishment and gives it to them here so that it's lightened for them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We quickly also glanced over these ideas of nubuwah, or more specifically wilaya, right? The idea of having to need somebody to tell us what to do. Because we said nowadays, people think that, okay, I believe in God, I believe that God is just, and I believe that I need to be a moral, ethical being, or I need to be a good human being, but I don't need somebody from 1400 years ago to tell me what to do. I don't need some person, some Arab from the past, who lived in that age, to tell me what I need to do. I know what's good, I know what's bad. I know what's right, I know what's wrong, because God gave me an intellect. God gave me a brain. I can figure these things out on my own. So we gave very simple proofs for why that is not the case. We said, yes, it is true that in some regards, we can figure things out. We know, for example, without the need for a religion, that lying is bad, stealing is bad, for example, simple things like that. But what happens when we get to the more complicated issues? Death penalty, or any sort of penal law, abortion, same-sex marriage, gun control and gun rights, all of these things which are hot-button issues right now, even in Islamic countries, right? Even if you talk about between Muslims who have the same Quran, right, and the same prophets and the same imams. For example, in Iran, it's still debated to this day whether hijab should be enforceable as a law or not. It's still debated to this day, right? And alhamdulillah, they allow for this debate to take place. And then sometimes in our own communities, we don't allow for the debates to take place. The point is this, that we, alhamdulillah, we have the ability to go through these differences of opinion, but there are certain things that our intellect and our brain cannot reach. We just can't understand it. This is why we have this need for wahy and revelation. Because once that aql, the intellect, reaches its peak and it stops, then something needs to connect back to God and bring that information down. Or in very kind of philosophical terms or irfani terms, they say when an intellect is truly purified, when it's not a materialistic or instrumental intellect, then it traverses the material realm and it ascends to the spiritual realm. Over there, it can gain information that we can't gain through, for example, scientific research or empirical studies. You simply just can't think of why, for example, Maghrib is 3 rak'ah. We have no idea why. But somebody who has access to God, has access to the true sharia, has access to the hikmah of Allah, they can gain that information and bring it down to us. Right? So this is why we said we need revelation in most of the affairs in our life. So yes, the intellect has its rightful place, but of course we need wahy, we need revelation, we need people who come and speak on behalf of God. Prophets, and then after that, people on behalf of the prophets, meaning the imams, awliya, awsiya, ulama, urafa. We need this chain of wilaya. This silsila has to come down. And keeping that alive, keeping this wilaya alive, has kept Islam intact for us to this very day. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We also had a short discussion on ma'ad as well. Normally in the books of our ulama, they say that the afterlife, resurrection, ma'ad is not something that you can prove with the intellect. They said, look, maybe you can do it for proving God's existence, you can do it for God's justice, you can do it for needing prophets and imams, but for the Day of Judgment, you can't really do it, and they also say you don't need it anyway. Because once you've proved the authenticity of the Quran and the prophets and the imams, well, now you take all your information from them, right? You've proven that you need revelation, so you can use revelation. You've used your intellectual proofs to prove that you need wahy and revelation, so obviously now you can use that whenever you want. But we said, look, is there still a way, if an atheist or an empiricist comes and wants to argue about the afterlife, is there any way we can argue with them? And we said, yes, there are some possible arguments that you might be able to use. And again, the summary was this. If you apply certain principles that, let's say, exist in classical physics, with quantum physics now it might be a bit more difficult, but generally speaking, if somebody believes, at least in the principle, that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, right? This is, I believe, the first or second law of thermodynamics, if I'm not mistaken, right? Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's just the same amount which is being transformed into different states, yeah? Any engineers can correct me if I'm wrong. So we said, look, if we see that human beings, if they're nothing but, again, if we're taking the materialistic, physical point of view and perspective, right, that an atheist may take, that we're just a bunch of impulses, electrical impulses and signals and matter, that's it. So look, is all of this energy or not? I said, yes, it's energy. Memories, feelings, emotions, thoughts, all of this stuff, is this energy or not? It's all energy. We say, look, when the heart, so for all the medical professionals here, what is an EKG or ECG? What does it actually measure? Any doctor here can speak up. No doctors? I think I asked this a few years ago too, and I was kind of shocked. No doctors in the community. Something's wrong, right? So if I'm not mistaken, right, those diodes that they put onto your chest to measure that is measuring basically some electrical signals which are coming from the heartbeat, if I'm not mistaken, right? Electrocardiogram, that's what it does. So we say, look, those signals, when they're given off, do they just hit the chest and then dissipate and die out? And doctors will say, no. They hit the chest and that's what's being measured, but they go on forever. Those signals are being sent out. Say, okay, so we're talking about memories, we're talking about what's being released from heartbeats, we're talking about thought patterns, emotions. All of this is energy. You are also saying that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Why then are you saying that after we, quote unquote, die, we go into non-existence? If all we are is this collection of energy, then why don't you just say that, no, this energy needs to transform? Where in the world can you prove that something goes into nothingness? Even in this world, everything goes through a life cycle. Everything is being transformed into different states. Why can you say that the human beings will go into non-existence? You have absolutely no empirical proof for that whatsoever. In fact, the laws of classical physics dictate otherwise. They say, no, this energy which emanates from a human being, from their mind, body, it needs to do something else. It has to come into another form. Now what that form is, well, we can get that information from revelation. Now where can you get that information? Well, you have no ability to do so. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay. So that was 12 nights worth of material crammed into about 20 minutes. So obviously, there were some parts that were probably confusing if you didn't hear it or understand it 3 years ago. If anybody has any sort of lingering confusions or doubts, please let me know. We can discuss it afterwards. It's no problem. And I believe, inshallah, that there is a plan for a Q&A session, possibly next week. So when they do set it up there, you can bring your questions there. It's no problem. Okay. So now with all of this there, we have this general idea about Iman. Iman, or a mu'min, according to one of our narrations, is somebody who now practices what they preach. They practice what they believe. I believe in God. I believe in the Day of Judgment. I believe in the prophets. I believe in the Imams. I believe in the Quran. I believe in the need for taqleed and maraji'. I'm following a marja who's giving me rules to follow because they know God better than I do. So I'm doing all of this. I'm a mu'min now. Based on that definition, I'm a mu'min because I'm practicing Islam. Now we have this question. Is every single person who practices what they believe in, who by definition so far is a mu'min, are they all at the same level? Do we think that anybody who acts upon their belief system is equivalent and equal to everybody else who also acts upon their belief system? Let me give some simple examples. So we know that we have the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the companions of all the Imams, the companions of Rasulullah. All of them, alhamdulillah, were the ones who acted upon what they believed, right? Okay, that's easy. Now let's go to something simple. The ones who followed, let's say, other individuals. The ones who followed Muawiyah, or Yazid, or Umar ibn Sa'ad, or the rest. All these individuals, were they praying? Yeah. Were they reading Quran? Yeah. Even according to many narrations and historical reports, Umar ibn Sa'ad was a hafiz of Quran, which is more than we can say about most of us, I think, right? The Khawarij, up all night, Salatul Layl, Namaz Shab, with the prostration marks on their heads. So if we compare, we might say that their practice is better than ours. Their iman might be better than ours. They have a strong belief system and they're acting upon it. Whatever you want to say about Daesh and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, all of them, of course we denounce them. But there's one thing you can't deny, is they have a belief system and they're acting upon it. Sometimes the belief system that you and I have, or that we ascribe to at least, what are we doing with it? Not much. They actually are sticking strong to what they believe, whereas we get flaky, right? We kind of lose in our belief system. But we try to act as best as we can. But what's the real point here? It's very clear that just because you act upon your belief system, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're equal in your iman to everybody else. So what this shows us at one stage is that there's different levels of iman. Iman at the very lowest stage is somebody who just acts upon the thing that they believe in. That's it. But the question now is, well, what do we mean by higher stages of iman? So this is what we now need to explore. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You know, we have different titles in life, right? Let's just talk about simple careers. We have people who are engineers or lawyers, teachers, doctors, although not in here apparently, but anybody who has these titles attributed to them based on what they've accomplished. Now the question is that you might have somebody who, let's say, was top of their class, aced all their exams, and is successful in their research, right? They're actually good at what they do. They're a good lawyer, a good teacher, and a good doctor. Can we also say that there's somebody who's also a doctor, a teacher, or a lawyer, or some other title, but they actually fail at what they do, meaning they're unsuccessful? Somebody who's a doctor, but he's an unsuccessful doctor. A lawyer, but not a very good lawyer. A teacher, but a terrible teacher. Simply having one part of the title is not enough. So, which leads us to our title of this series. We may be mu'mineen, but there's a difference between being a simple mu'min and a successful mu'min. How do we know what it means to be a successful mu'min? Or is there any place in the Quran where it's mentioned, this is what you can do to become a successful mu'min? This is how you can take your iman and start raising it up. You can start traversing some of these different levels. You can start increasing your connection to Allah and going past the simple idea of just practicing a few different things. And the answer is absolutely yes. And if you've seen the flyer, then you obviously know what I'm talking about, yeah? Chapter 23 of the Quran is Surah Al-Mu'minun. What is the very first ayah? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Definitely, without a doubt, absolutely, the mu'minun are successful. And then after this, Allah goes one by one and starts mentioning every single different trait that the successful mu'min and mu'mineen possess. So now, our task for the next few nights, inshallah, is to go sentence by sentence, ayah by ayah, examining each different one, theoretically going through the tafsir to see what is being said here possibly, according to our mufassirin, and then seeing how can we apply this practically in our life so that maybe we can start to become, little by little, successful mu'mineen. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.